Blessings. Welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we're in Matthew chapter 22, Mark 12, and Luke 20. Um, Normally I will, read them in order. Today, for some reason, all three of these, not for some reason, all three of these stories are the same, but for some reason, now I'll get to that. I want to go through Mark's version. Usually I'll do Matthew's version because that's the first one I read, and then I'll see Mark and Luke are the same. But today I want to go through using Mark instead of Matthew, and that's just personal. I get to where Matthew is absolutely one of my favorite books of the Bible, and I lean on Matthew for most everything when I do anything in comparison or I'm looking up something in the Gospels. I like to use Matthew's version almost exclusively. And I don't think that's a good thing all the time. I think we need to be aware of the differences in Mark and Luke. There aren't very many, but there are a few. And I think it's just as important to read Mark and Luke as it is to read Matthew. Um, it's not, those books are in the Bible as as well as Matthew for a reason. Um, and for me personally, sometimes these two books get left out more than even the minor prophets of the Old Testament. When I'm reading and looking things up, I'll just I'll go to Matthew and I won't think about these other two. So anyway, today I'm gonna look at Mark. So in Mark chapter 12, verse 13 through 17 is this awesome story of the coin, and they're trying to trick Jesus. I mean, they're at the wit's end. They want him arrested, they want him killed, they want him humiliated in front of the people. So they send some folks to try and trick him, and man, they puff him up. Oh, Jesus, we know that you have integrity, and you don't play favorites with anyone, and Jesus, I'm sure he's sitting there going, oh boy, here it comes. So they're building him up, and then they ask him this question. They ask him, there's a poll tax, and they ask him, is it right? Is it lawful for Jews to give poll tax to Caesar? Because now remember, the Romans have occupied Jerusalem and Israel, and we see Roman soldiers, we see Roman centurions, they're everywhere. I mean, um, later on, we'll see Pilate and Jesus in the interchange, but um, the Romans are there to keep the peace, but at the same time, they're collecting taxes. They're robbing the Jews. The Jews don't want them in there. So if Jesus said, no, we shouldn't be paying taxes to Caesar, it would stir up a riot, and they know this, but they're going to take that chance to try and get Jesus in trouble with the Romans so that maybe the Romans will get rid of Jesus and they won't have to. I mean, like I said, they're desperate and trying everything. So they give him this coin, long story short, and Jesus looks at the coin and Caesar's images on it. And Jesus says, render unto Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, and to God that which belongs to God. Wow. I mean, the wisdom of Jesus just stumps everyone, stops them cold in their tracks. And they're like, wow, he's right. We've talked, it's been probably several weeks, maybe even a couple months, but just this daily struggle between our spirit and our flesh. And we're going to deal with that struggle as long as we're alive, unless we're raptured. We're going to deal with the flesh and the spirit every single day. You're never going to get to the point in your Christian life that you're so good and so strong that you're not going to have a battle with your flesh every single day. And this is where he says, pick up your cross and follow me daily. Die to yourself daily. Every day we've got to die to that flesh, and we've got to live for the spirit. And when Jesus says, render unto Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, and to God that which belongs to God, your spirit and your spiritual life belong to God. In this world, we've got to do stuff that belongs to Caesar. And to me, it's just confirmation of my daily struggle. It helps. It's a reminder and a confirmation every day. If I can remember this verse, that when something comes up, render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. I got a lot of Christian friends, and I'm not going to get into the politics of this, but the scenario is always brought up that if the government tells us to give back our guns and they abolish the Second Amendment, do we go into revolution and do we fight? Well, that's a man-made law. That's the Constitution of the United States. That's nowhere in the Bible. That is Caesar's. And if Jesus says, render unto Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, and God, that which belongs to God, my guns don't belong to God. It has no part of my religion. And as hard as it would be, and this, I'm just using this as an example that will hit home, that will resonate with all law enforcement. If the government tells us to give up our guns, I've got to render unto Caesar that which belongs to Caesar, and I've got to render to God that which belongs to God. I know that is a hard argument and a hard statement. There's lots of Christian friends that we've had this conversation. Man, they get angry and they balk at this whole thing, and they don't want to hear it. So that's why I'm bringing that one up. That's such a good example on how hard it is sometimes to separate flesh and the spirit, but to do to God what God expects. And God says in Romans 13, obey the earthly authority set before you, even if they ask for your guns. That's what Jesus said yesterday. Man, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the chief priests and the elders, they sit in the seat of Moses and they have that authority. So do what they tell you to do, but don't follow their example, because they're not doing what God's called them to. Whoever calls for our guns, it's not what God has probably called them to, but it doesn't matter. You submit to their authority, you give them up, and you give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and God what belongs to God. In Mark 12:29, Jesus does something amazing here that I personally appreciate. I wish if you could just stop for a minute, pause this, and write down the 10 commandments. Write down every one you remember. Let's pause for 2 seconds and do that. 1,000, 1,000. If you did and came back, or even if you didn't stop to do it, most people can't remember all the 10 commandments. I think Jesus has compassion on those of us who just, it's only 10 things, but sometimes I can't remember all of them. I can remember 9 most of the time, but I usually forget one. So God gives us 2 commandments. Jesus gives us just 2 commandments that sums up all 10. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and the prophets hinge on these 2 commandments. So you just have to remember 2. Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Give to him what belongs to him. Love your neighbor as yourself. Anyway, tomorrow we're in Matthew chapter 23, Mark chapter 12, and Luke chapter 20 and 21. Read ahead. Hope to see you here. And in the meantime, be safe.